Welcome to this episode of Game and Earn. In today's video, we are going to go over some of the biggest gainers in terms of value over the last 45 days. Today, we are specifically going to be looking at Nintendo consoles. We'll take a look at both loose and complete in box games to see where you can make some profits. With that out of the way, let's get to it and find some ways to game and earn. Kicking off this video is a game I never thought we'd be talking about, but here we are. The game in question is Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine for the Nintendo 64. While one of the best platforms in history launched with the N64, this game isn't light years behind that one. The game is a fun 3D adventure style game with Indiana Jones that was reviewed and still reviews to this day pretty well. With that being said, it did not appear to sell very well, as evidenced by how few copies seem to exist. However, this title has something going for it that only a handful of other titles do. It was a Blockbuster exclusive.
I still have a Blockbuster card. What happened to Blockbuster?
Not anywhere near the value of other titles like Stunt Racer and Clay Fighter, Indiana Jones currently is just below the $100 price point. Another thing that might be helping is the fact that a new Jones trailer was just released in early December. In previous videos, I've covered how these things tend to help out game prices in the very short term, and I think that also played a part here. Indiana Jones could one day rise to the rarity like the other exclusives, but I wouldn't bet on it. For that reason, this is a sell for me, as I see this title continuing to stay reasonably valuable, but not quite reaching the upper echelons of those heavy hitters. Moving forward, let's cover a title that was actually first launched on the PC, but was ported over to the Nintendo 64. The obvious choice, StarCraft 64. Look, I'm sure some developers looked at that monstrosity that is the Nintendo 64 controller and said, wow, I could make so many RTS games with that. But please, no, why did you do this to us? It didn't have to be like this. StarCraft 64, and by extension the other RTS port, Command & Conquer, aren't really at fault here though. I remember playing them as a child and finding it actually somewhat enjoyable. But ignoring the impossible to implement in this era controls, StarCraft 64 is not a terrible game. That, however, has more to do with the original StarCraft being a pioneer in the RTS space than anything this port actually does. I'm sorry for being so negative, so let's focus more on the positive. This game has jumped drastically in price. Another uncommon title, the complete in box copy, is even rarer, and in November, multiple near mint copies sold for around $400. But that sparked the interest, it seems, and more copies were listed around the now average of $350. If you're not going for a full set of N64 titles, this is a title you should get off your shelf, as it likely won't eclipse that $400 price range reliably, and I can even see it falling back down under the $300 range in short order. Moving on to a series that has been around since the 1980s, let's talk about Bust-A-Move 99 on the N64. This title is based off the NES and arcade game titled Bubble Bobble, and is something I played a ton of as a kid. It has a really vibrant color scheme and is a fun and rewarding arcade game. But unlike the previously mentioned titles, Bust-A-Move is increasing in value for a different reason from the previous ones: scarcity. Finding a complete in-box copy of Bust-A-Move 99 is pretty difficult. There have only been 2 recent CIB sales in the last 90 days, with one coming in at the $200 range and the other coming in at $300. The main difference? The $300 sale had the ever-elusive registration card, which is becoming more and more difficult to find these days. Due to that, we are seeing quite an upward price trend of games with unique registration cards. In that era of games, most came with registration cards, but not every game came with a unique one, with the title of the game printed on it. In general, if you have a copy of one of those cards, I always try to hold on to them, and that play is apparently paying off already. For this title specifically though, I'd be inclined to sell for any price above $250, but this is more than likely a hold, as this title just seems to be more and more difficult to find. Nintendo 64 had a lot of movement, as you can tell by this point in the video. But next, I want to cover one of my absolute favorite titles, and one that has become ingrained as the quirky RPG everyone can't shut up about: Earthbound for the Super Nintendo. You've undoubtedly heard about this title by now, but it's frankly a masterpiece, and we'll likely never see another game like it. With that being said, we only care about the price here. So, what's up with Earthbound these days? Well, thankfully for gamers, it has come down from the peaks of $400, dipping all the way down to nearly $300 over the summer. But now it's starting to surge again, settling between the two prices, and it has been there for roughly a month or so now. For such a rare title, there sure are a lot of titles in circulation, with over 400 sales in a calendar year. That's a pretty healthy market. But now we have to ask ourselves, is the price going to increase, decrease, or stay the same? Well, I'm on the side of increasing, as this title just doesn't seem to be affected by normal price trends, as we saw at the start of the pandemic. Just like the story, the value of this title just doesn't make sense, and it will likely keep increasing in value. So, go grab a copy of Earthbound if you have the means to acquire it, or trade for it, as it will likely outgain most other titles in the long term. Up next is yet another title that I have in my grails of the Super Nintendo, which I'm sure I'll cover all of in a later video. This time though, let's talk about Ogre Battle: The March of the Black Queen, which probably has the longest title for all SNES games. The very first tactics games to be released, this game was extremely fun, rewarding, and had a lot of replayability. With 3 complete in-box sales exceeding the $1,000 price point in the last 90 days, I think we can safely say that Ogre Battle is entering elite territory for the SNES. Another title with a unique registration card, finding even a very good condition copy is difficult, and the current price reflects this. I'm not one to usually say ignore certain sales, but the ones that have sold for under $600 are flukes, and mostly because the boxes look like they were hit by a bus, so I think it's safe to actually ignore them here. On a more macro scale, we're seeing a steady climb starting all the way down in the $350 price range just 2 years ago, and since then, we've seen multiple copies sell for over $1,000, almost tripling in value. In my opinion, this isn't a fluke, and we should expect to see Ogre Battle continue to march forward in price. We'll call it a hold, but really it's a buy if you have the funds to acquire this, and now might be a good time to start posting in those in search of posts on Facebook groups. Finally, I'd like to cover an entire grouping of titles, but I have to narrow it down, so we're going to cover Metal Storm for the NES. In reality, I could have picked nearly a dozen titles in the $300 to $800 range, since many of them have increased $50 or more in the last 30 days alone. Titles such as Felix the Cat, Gunnak, Zen Intergalactic Ninja, and many more seem to be only going up these days. There's a good reason for it, but it's not very common to see so many heavy hitter titles all increase all at once without a once in a lifetime, hopefully, pandemic. But I digress, so let's talk about Metal Storm in particular. Generally, I try not to repeat the same points, but honestly, this month just had a similar trend: completeness and condition. In Metal Storm's case, it's both, as you'd expect, since it comes with not just a registration card, but also a poster. Now, imagine you're a young child who just got this awesome mech action game and you see a poster in the box. 9 times out of 10, that bad boy is going on your wall. So, just assume that a large majority of posters were lost in the sands of time, and you're left with probably few very true complete in box copies. And you can see that in the sales, with box, manual, and game copies going regularly for under $500, but true complete in box copies going for well north of $700 on average. So that leaves us in a tough place. Do we buy the cheaper version and look to buy the rest of the inserts individually? Or do we splurge and buy it all at once? Well, obviously that's up to you, but as for me, I'd love to be on the selling side of that deal, unless that title has a special place in your heart. Alright, well, that wraps up this month's Game and Earn video for the month of December for Nintendo systems all the way from NES to Switch. If you enjoyed the content, please make sure to like and subscribe, and feel free to drop any comments with questions or suggestions. We plan on doing monthly videos for all major systems and more. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.